Wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then we are going to have Maria-Lisa do the language justice statement.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending where you're coming from. My name is Maria-Lisa Fuller, and I am part of the CLC. Very excited to be here, so thank you for this space. And thank you all for the interest in continuing working towards language justice. My role today will be serving as your interpreter, and we are going to enable interpretation in 1 minute. And when we do this, you are going to see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen right here that says interpretation. So I'm going to ask you to click on it and just choose the channel that you prefer, whether this is English or Spanish. The idea here is that we can all communicate in the language of our hearts, the language that we feel more comfortable, the one that it's very close to us. So by doing so, the idea here is that we can all witness and be part of conversations that can be meaningful and that can be in benefit all the people participating today. So thank you again for taking the space to continue learning about language justice. So important for all the amazing work that you are folks, that you are all doing in this spaces. So that being said, I'm going to say goodbye to you, and I will see you in the channels. I'm ready when you folks are. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Indira. Thank you, everybody.
All right. I just turned it on, so you should see a channel, and you can select English or Spanish. Right. So everybody, let's just do a quick check to make sure everybody can hear. Awesome. Great. Right. Are we good to get started, Maria? Maria, or is there anything else you wanted to kind of check in before we get started? We've got kind of a smaller group today. I hope maybe some other folks will trickle in.
That's what I'm hoping too. Otherwise we have a mighty group, so I think there'll still be some good discussion.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We have Indira, who is the CEO of the CLC, who's going to be co-facilitating with me, and we have Maria-Lisa, who will be interpreting. Just a quick reminder, some of our a part of our presentation will be in Spanish, so just make sure you have the interpretation feature enabled so that you can listen in. Before we get started, I want to just share a couple of the group agreements that we talked about at the last session, which was last week. These are some of the things that you all shared with the group. When we talk about popular education, we mean that everyone here is a learner, but also a teacher. So we want this place to be one of conversation and discussion, and one where we could all learn from each other. We're going to be kind and respectful of the feedback within the group. We're going to assume positive intent, practice vulnerability, being open to new or unfamiliar information, being open to shared knowledge and accepting that knowledge with an open heart, and we are going to be taking care of ourselves. Is there anything that you all would like to add to this list as we continue our conversation today? No? All right. With that in mind, I want to open up the space before we kind of get started to talking about, if you remember last time we talked about language oppression and the impact that has on our communities. And today we're going to be focusing more on what are the solutions, what are the tools at our disposal so that we can practice language justice. But I want to open up just with some reflection time. And I'm going to share the folder with the case studies that I shared last time. And I'm going to put them in the chat. But I want to see if anybody had any reflections from our last session, which was last Tuesday. Anything that you read, and maybe during the week you had some time to go back and review the case studies, watch some of the videos. I really just want to open it up to a little bit of conversation before we move into some breakout rooms. Oh yeah, thanks.
I unfortunately had to leave to train a class, probably about 40 minutes into the session, but I went back and listened to it. A lot of the case studies were really upsetting.
Yeah. Karen, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, not sure how to process a lot of that, but looking forward to today and talking about some of the ways that I can be more interactive and speaking for in an appropriate way and validating and the words aren't coming to me today.
That's okay. That's fine. Totally fine. I'm just gonna do a quick, just a reminder of kind of the groups that we talked about last time. Share my screen here. We looked at some case studies with African American, the Black American experience, American Indians and Native peoples, German speakers, Spanish speakers, the deaf community, and then recent events more focused on immigrant and refugee communities. And, you know, what we're seeing right now with an influx of immigrant and refugees coming in, and what are some of those, how does oppression continue to show up? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to let you all, we didn't have the breakout group function last week, but I'm going to give you all about 10 minutes and we're going to just break up into two groups. So not very many groups. I want you all to look through the case studies. And maybe if you had already looked at some of them last time, sharing some of these questions. Were you familiar with this event? How did it make you feel? How do you see how do you see power play into this case study? That idea of power and how power and oppression are kind of together. How do you see that play out? And does knowing about this event influence you to do your work any differently? So that's kind of what we want to spend some time sharing. Does everyone have access to the case studies? And I can put them in the chat again. Yes. All right. And like I said, we're only going to do two groups, so it's not going to be and it's going to be a shorter conversation because I think there's only two folks in each group, and that's okay. And maybe about 10 minutes, but I'll go in and check in at about 6-7 minutes. If you're about finished with the conversation, we can come back to the larger group. Does that sound good with everyone? All right. I'll go ahead and open up the rooms. And pause and continue the recording. Would love to hear from any discussion in your group, any reflections that you all had about the case studies, or even to me, like one of the most impactful parts of the training is seeing how it relates back to our work and our current practice. So just love to hear from maybe one or two folks that might want to share. Anybody from group one, which is Jen, Karen, or Shaylin? Anything you all want to reflect on or share?
So our group talked about how a lot of the case study we weren't aware of, had never been taught in school or heard of. And I know for me, it was extremely disappointing, frustrating um, to hear that kind of thing has happened sort of throughout history and all different time periods and stuff. And we discussed a little bit of um, the facilities and things that our jobs have as far as translating or services for different language and things like that. But I think we can always do better.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks for sharing. So going back and thinking about your current practices and current services and how your organization might be able to support linguistically diverse folks. Yeah, great. Would love to hear from Maria and Tammy. Anything that you all reflected on in your group?
Yeah. Oh, Tammy, you can go.
No, you can go ahead.
Tim, if you want to share the story of your hearing impaired friend as well too, that would be, I think that's a good example. But yeah, I don't know. We just started talking about it. We didn't get a chance to read the entirety of it, but I think one of the main, like, a thesis of it is just like having respect for other people in general. And it's like, if you don't even have respect for people, then clearly these types of things are just gonna keep happening. So I don't know how to teach that, but I'm glad that everyone here has it, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Tammy, did you want to share something?
I was just sharing that I have a friend that's hearing impaired, and he'll come meet with a bunch of us and, just socially, but I always felt bad for him because he has to communicate all of us through text because none of us really know sign language, and I felt like we should be respecting him and trying to learn. So I actually am trying to learn sign language so I can communicate with him and the way he communicates, not just expecting him to communicate the way we do. So I was just telling her, I kind of, you don't realize it until you're in a situation because you just kind of live your life not realizing people have to, I don't know, adjust to us without us knowing. I don't know. It's just kind of, I felt bad for him. So I'm trying to learn to communicate with him the way I should be.
Yeah.
Or he knows.
Oh man, that's such a great segue to talking about language justice and what that would look like. What is a world with language justice? What might that look like? And so great segue, Tammy, because the video that we have to share with you is actually around ASL. So to kind of get us started about what this world could look like with language justice. One of the best ways that I have to share this is using this video. It's an ad from Samsung, and it's a few years old now, but it captures, creating these spaces and transforming spaces so that everyone feels included. So I'm going to share this video with you all. Make sure that you pay attention to the written word because there's no spoken words. There are no spoken words, so go ahead.
Evet, kameralar kaydı gitsin arkadaşlar.
Manav hazır ol. Şimdi. Taksi hazır ol. Hareket.
Right, I'm going to kick it off to Indira to kind of debrief this video with us and take us to the next thing.
Gracias, Rosie. I will be speaking Spanish, so make sure that you have the Spanish and the English interpretation selected on the interpretation icon. Pues gracias, por primero por tenernos aquí, pero quería yo empezar antes de repasar eso, quería hablar un poquito acerca de cómo se sintieron después de ver este video, qué son los sentimientos o cómo sintieron el corazón después de ver este video. Para mí me provoca muchas lágrimas, me sale agua de los ojos, pero ¿qué sintieron ustedes?
I felt the same. I was getting teary and it sent shivers down my spine of just I don't have language challenges in that way, and to be able to offer that experience to that young man, it just made me really happy and humbled.
¿Alguien más quiere compartir algo de cómo se sintieron después de ver el video?
I thought I had sent it to the whole group, but it looks like I just sent the message to Rosa. I had remembered watching that, and I think it took me like 15 seconds into the video to remember what it was, and then I just got chills everywhere, and yeah, just what a lovely world that would be if we could all communicate with each other in our love language.
Sí. Cuando pienso en el potencial que no tenemos acceso, que no podemos conectarnos con todo el potencial de las personas porque no hacemos el esfuerzo de comunicarnos con ellos en el idioma que ellos se sientan cómodos, es como podríamos abrir un potencial de poder, o sea, muchos cambios en nuestra comunidad al ver que las personas se puedan comunicar. Vamos a definir lo que es la justicia del lenguaje para que podamos entender un poquito más, poner un marco. Hemos entendido que el mundo está lleno de opresión del lenguaje, que vivimos en un mundo donde oprimimos a personas que no hablan el inglés. Pero vamos a pensar y soñar en grande y ver cómo sería un mundo con la justicia del lenguaje. Y la justicia del lenguaje es una práctica intencional que valora la interpretación y la traducción como herramientas críticas para la expansión de la comunicación. El término la justicia del lenguaje es... Ay, se me fue. Ok. El término la justicia del lenguaje es una manera poderosa de describir los derechos fundamentales de individuos a que sus voces sean escuchadas y para conectarse en el idioma en el cual ellos se sientan más cómodos. Entonces nosotros a esto le llamamos el idioma de nuestro corazón. Y cuando pienso yo en qué decimos que es el idioma de nuestro corazón, ¿cómo es que yo me puedo relacionar más a ese término? Es que pienso, ¿cómo es que yo me siento más a gusto cuando hablo cuál idioma? Y no es solamente el idioma, a lo mejor no es necesariamente una diferencia en idioma, es cuáles son las palabras, cuál es el tono, cómo es que yo me puedo comunicar mejor. Y ese idioma o esas palabras y ese tono y esa manera de hablar que me hace sentirme más poderosa, más fuerte en las palabras que estoy diciendo. Entonces queremos crear un espacio y ser intencionales al crear este espacio donde la gente se pueda comunicar en el idioma de su corazón. Entonces esta es una práctica equitativa. Vamos a remover el estigma de que la interpretación solamente es para aquellos que hablan español o para los que no hablan inglés. Por mucho tiempo yo fui intérprete de casi toda mi vida, pero como en el 2099 empecé a interpretar más profesionalmente. Y me acuerdo que me invitaban a interpretar a lugares y me daban un equipo de interpretación y me decían, en aquella mesa está la gente que habla español, dales a ellos interpretación. Entonces ellos estaban aislados, no se comunicaban con nadie, nomás era entre ellos mismos lo que ellos decían. Entonces nadie les preguntaba lo que ellos pensaban, no eran parte de la conversación. Cuando pensamos en la justicia del lenguaje, vamos a remover que ellos tienen que estar separados y vamos a crear un espacio donde la interpretación es para todos, no solamente para los que no hablan inglés. Entonces es así como que si no hablas los idiomas que se representan en este espacio, entonces necesitas agarrar interpretación, porque la voz de todos, aunque nomás sea una persona, va a ser valorada. La voz de cada individuo importa lo suficiente para que yo escuche por mi audífono. Eso a veces es difícil hacer eso porque la gente dice, no, yo hablo inglés, yo no necesito. Eso es para ellos y como que estamos acostumbrados que la interpretación nomás es para los que no hablan inglés. En la justicia del lenguaje, nosotros decimos todos los que no hablan, ya sea inglés, español, somali, francés, cualquier idioma que vemos aquí mucho en nuestras comunidades, van a utilizar la interpretación y siempre va a haber una intención de ocupar intérpretes, traducir y hacer todo lo necesario para que todos puedan entender. Entonces, la práctica requiere una facilitación intencional que se centra en las voces lingüísticas y culturalmente diversas. Cuando solamente tenemos, vamos a decir que hay una reunión y solamente toda la reunión se dirige en inglés, la gente que habla otro idioma van a sentir como que ese espacio no es para ellos. Pero si tan siquiera pueden hacer una bienvenida, si pueden hacer anuncios, si pueden presentar alguna parte o hacer una actividad que promueva otro idioma, entonces esas personas van a decir, oh, aquí sí es espacio para mí, aquí pertenezco yo, aquí sí valoran mi voz. Eso es la diferencia entre solamente ofrecer interpretación y traducción y practicar la justicia del lenguaje. Entonces quiero hablar acerca de unas herramientas que tenemos disponibles al hacer este espacio multilingüe para la justicia del lenguaje. Y la primera es la interpretación. Y eso es lo que ahorita está haciendo María Elisa. Ella está interpretando todo lo que yo estoy hablando. Entonces la interpretación es un mensaje traducido, pero es hablado. La traducción es un mensaje interpretado, pero escrito. Entonces, si ustedes tienen volantes, si tienen presentaciones, agendas, cualquier cosa escrito, ustedes las mandan para traducción. Esas son diferentes destrezas, habilidades. Un intérprete tiene que pensar rápido y sacar palabras rápido. Un traductor es más perfeccionista y va a revisar bien el trabajo escrito. Va a asegurarse que está escogiendo la mejor palabra para el mensaje que quiere hacer. Entonces hay intérpretes y hay traductores y es importante saber la diferencia. La siguiente es la localización. Muchas veces la localización es así como yo pienso que en cada área tenemos una manera de hablar. En Colorado, por mucho tiempo, era primordialmente cuando hablabas en español, buscabas a alguien que pudiera comunicarse con el español mexicano, porque muchos inmigrantes venían de México y eso es el español que más se habla. Recientemente, ahora en los últimos meses, hemos visto que entró una gran población de suramericanos de Venezuela y Colombia, y ellos tienen otra forma de hablar y las palabras que ellos dicen son un poquito diferentes y el tono es diferente. Entonces, si tú ocupas intérpretes por un teléfono para que se comuniquen con alguien, no vas a saber si las maneras de hablar son las mismas, si hay un entendimiento total. Entonces es importante buscar o fomentar o crecer talento local para que haga este trabajo, para que haga las interpretaciones, depende de cómo se dicen las cosas. Quiero dar un ejemplo más real. Aquí en Denver por mucho tiempo estábamos interpretando muchas reuniones acerca de la gentrificación o la palabra correcta es el aburguesamiento. Y casi todas las reuniones que íbamos tenían que ver con viviendas y gentrificación. Pues gentrificación no es una palabra en español, pero si tú vas a cualquier comunidad en Denver, todos lo llaman gentrificación. La palabra correcta es aburguesamiento. O si traes un intérprete de España que viene y dice, vamos a tener una reunión de aburguesamiento, nadie va a entender lo que están diciendo porque no usamos esa palabra. Entonces, ese es un ejemplo de cómo podemos usar la localización y cómo es importante encontrar intérpretes locales. La siguiente es la transcreación. Y la transcreación significa que nosotros vemos un mensaje en inglés y lo vamos a adaptar y vamos a mantener el mismo mensaje, pero adaptarlo para que sea más sensible a la cultura en la que estamos interpretando. Y Rosa tiene un ejemplo maravilloso con esto. Entonces voy a darle lugar a Rosa para que nos cuente acerca de un programa que hicimos una vez.
Thank you, Indira. I'm going to share really quickly this a real life example of transcreation and how we can see it play out. So a few years ago, I was working for a nonprofit that was working towards increasing family engagement in schools, and also like literacy programs. And one of the things that we were working with a community, with a school that was primarily immigrant and refugees. So you had a lot of refugees from some African countries, from Sudan, from Afghanistan. So like 95% of the students in this school were refugees. And so they decided to do a reading program to promote parents reading to their children, particularly in that early childhood phase. And so the way that they did it is through a Super Bowl themed reading program. So they said, we're going to market this as a Super Bowl theme reading program. For every 6 books you read, you get a touchdown. And then if you get, you read an extra book, you get 7 points. If you get 3, you can turn in 3 books for a field goal. If you don't read for that week, then you get a flag, the yellow flag. And a lot of the parents were like, what is this? Like Super Bowl? What is American football? Like it didn't translate at all. It didn't make very much sense, right? So they decided, they were like, oh, we're going to scrap that. That's not going to work. So they decided on doing a World Cup theme, which everyone knows, soccer, in these countries, in other countries. And so it was simple, 1 book, 1 goal. And then they had the opportunity to like represent their countries with their flags. It just was a lot more culturally responsive. So if we would have done just like a, straight translation, it would have been the Super Bowl theme, right? It would have been, this is American football. It doesn't really make sense. But instead, transcreation takes the message, which is, hey, we want you to read more books with your kids, and culturally adapts it to something that the school or that community would understand. Does that make sense? Do you all see the difference between transcreation and even localization or even translation? Is that making sense to folks? Okay, great. Indeed, I could get back
Bien,
up.
gracias. Gracias, Rosa. I'm going to go into English just to show you that I do also speak English. No, just joking. Just to speak English. So the next one I want to talk about is community leadership or local capacity. And this is where we have where you actually find leaders that are moving this movement along, that are actually pushing for language justice. And a lot of times we see that it's the non-English speakers who are present at all these meetings and that want to be involved and want to be engaged. And they're the ones that are saying, hey, what about us? I have something to say. So it's wonderful to grow our capacity, our local capacity and our leadership of folks that are doing this, folks that are interpreters and translators locally. Over the past 4 years, we have been training interpreters across the state of Colorado. And the other day we had a picture of 2 interpreters in Grand Junction working with Governor Polis, and they took our training and they're doing this work in their community. So localization is real. The way we speak in Denver is very different than the way we speak in Grand Junction, or, the way we communicate or the topics that we talk about. So that whole idea of growing a leadership pool of interpreters, of leaders that are pushing for language justice is really important. And that's actually what moves all these things along. Any questions about any of these? Any, I guess I would just want y'all to think about what are the tools that you are currently using in your spaces? Are there any of these that you all already use, or that you think that maybe you could grow or start using more of? And just unmute your mic and you could say something if you want.
I think that I'd always use the same language for interpretation and translation. Translation. So I think that's an interesting distinction for me, but I can see how it would be challenging to make sure that all of these levels are happening congruently in order to communicate across different languages or ASL, or however you need to provide materials to others or access to others.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or anything that they want to share? Okay, let's move along. If you do at any time, please just unmute yourself and speak up. We want to talk about how do we actually create this multilingual space. So it all starts with the language justice statement. Before any meeting or before anything happens, before the welcomes and the logistics of any meeting, you start with a language justice statement because you want everyone to understand from the beginning the message that you're trying to give to the community. So we start with language justice, making sure that everyone can hear, making sure that everyone has a headset, or in a Zoom room, making sure that everybody has selected, you've checked the channels. And we talk about why language justice is important, because it's an equitable practices that dismantles, a way of excluding people, or, just making sure that you say why you're doing language justice and why this is happening is kind of the first step. The second step is to be intentional about having interpreters and translators at all the meetings or at any event. All the materials, everything is to be translated and to have an interpreter for that. Sometimes we say, oh, well, I have a bilingual person that's coming and I'm sure that they can help with that. And that's great if that's all that you have, but actually hiring an interpreter and sending things out, or making sure that you're kind of double checking your translations is really important, and not just relying on volunteers or just people that might be bilingual that could possibly do it. Or even worse, Google Translate. That's not something that we suggest or that we think that should be done. If it is, then it needs to be read and proofread by somebody who is fluent or native to that language. Facilitation in the non-dominant language. Como lo estaba haciendo hace ratito, antes de empezar a hablar inglés, el tener a alguien que está hablando otro idioma y como incomodar a las personas que nunca escuchan por interpretación, es bueno para que ellos sepan, hey, a lo mejor alguien va a hablar y van a necesitar usar el audífono, o le da permiso a las otras personas que no hablan inglés, decir, hey, aquí puedo hablar yo, aquí puedo decir yo algo porque ella está hablando inglés o porque allá enfrente están hablando mi idioma, entonces sí se permite hablar aquí en este espacio. Eso es lo que hace la facilitación en el idioma no dominante. Y como siempre, esto siempre lo decimos, lo recalcamos, el tener liderazgo y voces diversas, o el no nomás decir, ok, vamos a hacer esto, pero no incluir o no deberás hacer el alcance necesario para que vengan las personas. La justicia del lenguaje no va a funcionar en un espacio donde todos hablan inglés. La justicia del lenguaje no va a ser una cosa real si no tienes a la gente que está llegando, que necesita los servicios, o que de veras necesita ser parte de esa conversación. Entonces, hacer ese alcance necesario para que la gente llegue es muy, muy importante. ¿Alguna pregunta acerca de uno de estos, de estas cosas para cuando pensamos en la justicia del lenguaje? ¿Alguna duda? Ok, vamos a la siguiente diapositiva. Si tienen, nomás digan. Vamos a hablar un poquito acerca de cuáles son las prácticas de comunicación que hacen la justicia del lenguaje más fácil. Y cuando pensamos en que alguien va a estar interpretando o traduciendo todo lo que decimos, tenemos que pensar en cómo digo las cosas o qué voy a decir para asegurarme que sea mi mensaje más entendido, mejor o mejor entendido. So, la primera es la lectura y la escritura. La manera que escribimos, la manera que hablamos o que presentamos información es muy importante. Esto es lo que permite que nosotros podamos dar el mensaje más claro, más directo, más al punto. Entonces, no solamente, y el pensar de que no siempre todos tienen el mismo nivel de alfabetización. A veces pensamos, oh, vamos a hacer un volante y ahí va a tener toda la información y pensamos que todos saben leer y escribir en el mismo nivel. O decimos, métanse al sitio red y ahí llenen la encuesta y pues a veces la gente no tiene ese nivel de alfabetización. Les doy un ejemplo rápido de esto. A veces la gente hace videos y nos llaman y nos dicen, ponle subtítulos en español y lo podemos hacer, pero el español es 20% más largo que el inglés. Entonces, en lo que se dice una frase, la frase en español va a estar más larga para leer y ya cuando ya vas acabando de leer, ya se fueron a la otra imagen y se te perdió la mitad del mensaje, si es que sabes leer. No podemos asumir el mismo nivel de alfabetización para todas las personas. La siguiente es la jerga. La jerga es todas esas frases o esas palabras que solamente nosotros sabemos lo que es. Por ejemplo, en GS vamos a hacer oh, let me say it in English so it can make sense. In GS, we're going to do an HIA to determine what are the factors that are impacting the community. And we found out that the PPM, or CDPHE found out that the PPM is really impacting kids' asthma. Who knows what all that stuff is? Who knows HIA is health impact assessment? Who knows PPM is particles per matter or CDPHE? Like, we need to make sure that if we have special words or special acronyms that we're going to use in a space, that we are kind of defining what they mean. So CDPHE, even if we start with a list of like a glossary of terms that we use all the time. Even sometimes I feel that we go into these spaces and we use BIPOC or we use social determinants of health or equity, and we assume that everyone knows what we're talking about, and that's not necessarily true. So kind of starting off with like a definition or a glossary of terms that we can show everyone is a good way of communicating to make sure that everyone understands. The next one is colloquial language. Some of us, that's just the way we talk, and we say that you need to make sure you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And when we say things like that and we're interpreting, sometimes we'll interpret the actual words that we're saying and not so much the message. And that could be scary to folks if we think we're throwing babies out. So it's about making sure that we are saying what we mean and not and trying to avoid these colloquial ways of speaking. And if that's just the part of how we speak, then maybe saying, if we say that and we catch ourselves saying, what I mean by that is don't throw out the good with the bad, or, you know, things like that. So being careful with how we use colloquial language. And cultural icons. This is, sometimes people use this all the time. I remember going to a staff meeting and they had promotoras, these women that are community health workers that were in the meeting. And the meeting was all these staff people that worked in the office, and then the promotoras worked out in the community, and they would meet once a week. And every week before the meeting started, it was a conversation about Michael and the office and Scott or whatever. I don't know. And people, like, there was no way of interpreting jokes, no way of interpreting what was happening, and no way that people could relate to those cultural icons. So it's best to just kind of avoid those cultural icons, or if we do say, and we kind of have to explain it, which then makes it not funny. So just being careful with the way we communicate. And these are just some tips when you think about, as we are speaking or communicating with a multilingual community or community members, we need to make sure that we are careful about how we say things and trying to be as direct and to the point as possible. Any questions about this or any examples that you've seen, how we maybe do it right or how we sometimes miss the mark?
I'd be curious to hear, in your organization, what is some of the jargon that you all use on a regular basis? I'm curious to know.
So we have so many acronyms in our line of work. And I just started out, I mean, I was working as a DSP. There's one. Okay, so a direct service professional. And I didn't know what that was even when I was doing it, because we didn't call that in Wisconsin. But yeah, I was working as a direct service provider for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities for a while. And so you would just be like a DSP for people with IDD. But and now it's, whenever I'm talking to all of our members or anyone, that's just comes as a, like, everyone, I presume knows that, but you can't assume. And then, when I was first getting into this work more so, when all of the different acronyms would come at me, I would feel left out for sure, because, people just kept talking in acronyms and I'm just kind of sitting there trying to absorb things, but then I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm too scared to ask what that acronym is, because, like, I guess I should have known what that was already. But it's very particular to our line of work as well too. Like, oh my goodness. So CDPHE does have a website where they have a lot of the acronyms in it. So we've tried to kind of, I mean, that helps, but at the same time, I always kind of want to make everyone aware. I'm like, not everyone knows what all these acronyms are. So in order to actually, you start a presentation or you say something, just don't go right into acronym talk. At least have what they stand for, first of all, so you don't feel like you're, leaving someone out or making them feel like they have to ask and then it's more helpful.
Thanks, Maria. I would imagine that in a lot of, what we have seen in a lot of organizations that are service providers or that are supporting, communities that might be systematically underserved, jargon, acronyms tend to be, front and center to a lot of their work. I'm also curious, just in your line of work, folks, working with folks with intellectual disabilities, how does literacy play a part in that? How do you all ensure that the way that you're communicating is that isn't, riddled with a ton of text, but that is, that you're communicating in a way that they're understanding? Are you all using videos? What are some of the tools? I'm curious to know. And anybody could jump in and unmute.
So we have a bunch of different programs on campus, but I think a great example, probably our most diverse population, is at our school. And we really tailor it to the individual. So whether that's a like storyboard or pictures, we have sign language interpreters for ASL, or the students can write. We give them like a little whiteboard if they want to write instead of verbal communication. So I feel like our school does a really good job with each individual. But as far as widespread communication to families and stuff, I'm not sure how that works.
we do a lot of meetings, like in person or sometimes on Zoom, so you can have that verbal communication with someone who might not be able to read. But one of the other things that we've done is make an effort to translate our like official documents into like plain language. So like simplified, really clear, easy to understand, just kind of take all the like bureaucratic professional, like not professional language, but take those kind of like jargony type things. They're just, you know, and translate them into things that people understand. So like we have a whole packet on an individual's rights when they're receiving services, and just as a person with disabilities, that we've translated into kind of plain language so that it can be, you know, shared in writing with them in a way that's hopefully more accessible, but also that we have that conversation with a person, you know, and like we do similar things, you know, using their AAC or their just however they need to communicate.
Thank you so much. That helps. So we're moving on. Okay, so we talked about the ways of communicating. So we want to talk about language justice and how do we practice it? What are the things that we actually need to do in our organizations to kind of evaluate if we're practicing, or how do we move to a space where we are practicing? So Rosa has shared a file in our in the chat for y'all to open, and that allows us to kind of really evaluate our practices. So we're going to just kind of review these one by one, and then we'll break up into small groups to kind of really see where we're at as an organization. So the first thing that we need to do when thinking about practicing language justice is allocation of resources. They say money talks, so we can't say we're going to do this without really putting funding or like a budget line item that says this is what we're going to spend on this, or this is what we need to spend on this to be able to reach the right community or reach all the community. So first thing is allocation of resources. They're not in any particular order, so we're going to go on to the next one. Is interpretation. Do we have interpreters at all our meetings? Are we actually reaching out to multilingual or linguistically diverse communities to make sure that they are getting the message, or that they have access to our services? And do we have interpreters available for them? Next one is staff development, and that's exactly what y'all are doing now. Are we learning how to do this better? Are we evaluating or practicing as an organization? Are we creating spaces for people to communicate in their language? I remember there's a few examples of this. We trained a group of interpreters here in Denver, and one of them worked at Home Depot, and they said, you know what, Home Depot doesn't let us speak Spanish in the lunchroom. Like if we're in our break, we can't speak Spanish at all. But when we are on the floor and there's 80% of the people that walk in there speak Spanish because they're the contractors that are doing the work, we have to use our Spanish to make sure that they get what they need. So how do we develop our staff so that they can feel like they are okay to speak the language that they feel most comfortable in, without feeling like they're going to hurt somebody's feelings, or they're going to get in trouble, or what does that look like? And that's going to fall into culture and climate. So we'll talk a little bit more about that one. But staff development is just really understanding what do we need to create in our staff, in our organization, to make sure that everyone is comfortable with that space. The next one is language needs assessment. So what are we doing to find out what are the languages needed in our community? Are we communicating with schools in the area to make sure that we are actually translating messages into the languages that are needed in our community? Or how are we finding out what tools are available for us to really engage the linguistically diverse community? We can assume that Spanish is always one, and maybe people say that here in Denver, we always need Spanish and Vietnamese interpreters. But now I feel like there's Burmese, there's French, there's Somali, there's a lot more and Ukrainian is growing. So how often are we doing these language needs assessments, and how are we finding out what those language needs are? The next one is literacy and translation. How are we developing our content? How are we making sure that the content that we develop is translatable, or is written in a way that people can understand it when it's translated? And are we translating our documents? Are we translating our material to make sure it gets out to the community in need? Finally, culture and climate. And this is the one where how are we creating a space where are we like putting signs in different languages, or are we creating a space where people feel comfortable when they walk in the room or into our office space? Do they feel comfortable to ask somebody a question in a different language, or to say, hey, I may not know how to communicate, but can you help me with this? Or how are we making sure that the culture and the climate in the space where we're working at is a space that is welcoming and accepting of diversity in different languages? So I'm going to stop right there and kind of ask if there are any questions about this. And then Rosie's going to give us instructions on what to do with our breakout groups. So first, any questions about the 6 factors that we look at when evaluating language justice practices? No? Okay. Rosa.
Thanks, Indira. All right, folks. So I want to make sure everybody was able to open this document right here. Does everybody see that? And it's also in the booklet, but I feel like this format is a little bit easier to read. So in this sheet, you'll see the 6 indicators. So you'll see resource allocation, assessment of language needs, literacy and translation, interpretation, staff development, and culture and climate. Then you'll also see the categories. So where you want to be is language justice. But we know it's not just like a thing that you just, snap your fingers and you're there. Maybe you're in language inclusion, awareness, or exclusion. But what we're going to ask you to do is to look at these indicators, and for each one, evaluate where you are in your organization. So for resource allocation, where am I? Am I in language justice, inclusion, awareness, or exclusion? Same for assessment of language needs. And you can read through the rubric here and figure out, where you can evaluate yourself. And this is not meant to be a, kind of a shaming exercise, but rather, what are the things that we can do to move to the next level? Once you all read through that, we're going to complete this writing template that says, excuse me, in my organization, I have the ability to influence. So which of the 6 indicators do you have the ability to influence? Is it resource allocation? Is it language needs assessment? Do you have the ability to influence requesting for interpretation or requesting a translator? And then based on the assessment tool, our organization falls into blank category. So that's where you put in language justice, inclusion, awareness, or exclusion. And then to move our organization to the next step, what are you committed to? So I'll put this in the chat, but I also, if you all want to just snap a quick picture of it, you can. But what we're going to do is we're going to have about 10 minutes to, go through the 6 indicators and decide where we are, and then figure out what are some next steps that we can do in our organizations to move us to the next level. Does that make sense? Yes? I think because we have such a small group, Maria, we might end up wrapping up a little early, if that's okay with you all. So we'll go ahead and move into the small groups. Does everyone have the language justice continuum? All right, I'm gonna put this kind of the writing template in the chat. And then I'm gonna go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. And we'll be in the same ones as we were last time. All right. Okay, we'll have about 10 minutes, folks, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. Would love to hear just some of your thoughts. If you're welcome to read the template, if that's, the writing template, if that's easier. But if you all didn't get to that and just discussing, you just worked on discussing some of the indicators, that's okay too. Let's start, if possible, with Maria and Tammy. Would love to hear from what you all discussed.
Yeah, this was I know you said it didn't want to be like a shaming kind of thing, but I was a little shamed by by a few things that we don't do at Alliance. And so we're only 4 people, but I mean our membership is statewide and we have, hundreds of members. But even just, I mean, this is the first thing we've done, and we don't have an allocated budget for language services at all. So this is the first thing we've done ever for any type of resource allocation for language justice. So that's a step, but it's still, I really think we're basically in the language awareness, and it's not like we're not open about it, because we are, and I'm acting very defensive right now, but I don't mean to. But it's just reading this, I never realized how much more we can do to help, our members, and even just, the 4 of us to think more broadly. So yeah, a lot to think about.
And I promise you, like, when we developed this tool, it wasn't meant to shame folks, but it's meant, like, to me, one of the things that we heard early on in doing this work is, like, we need some practical steps. We need to know what it is we need to do next, right? And so to us, this has been, the last 7 years of listening from different orgs and looking at organizations that, are really practicing language justice. What did it take to get there? So just know, like, these are just actionable steps that you all can take, but nobody starts out in language justice. Like, no organization, we've been doing this work for 10 years. Nobody has, said one morning, hey, I started a nonprofit and language justice is top of mind. It's never happened. So it's, be gentle with yourself, allow yourself some grace as an organization. You all are taking the steps to learn, and that's a good thing. And, slowly you'll be moving into that space. Tammy, I'm not sure if you wanted to share anything.
I kind of agree. I just feel like it's more of awareness right now then. And so now to move forward from like, okay, we do need to learn a lot. We didn't realize how much we hadn't, and we have the ability. So now we're aware we should start moving forward. I feel like we're doing it with our agency. Like, we never really had a bilingual coordinator or case manager that we worked with their families, and we're starting that, and we should have done it years ago. But instead of looking at the past and kicking ourselves, we're doing it now, and we're hoping to grow from that and get more families and support different nationalities.
Yeah, wonderful, Tammy. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, like, don't kick yourself about the past, just, thinking about what we do moving forward. Love to hear from Karen, Jen, Shaylin, any thoughts that you all have?
I think we spent a lot of time just kind of, it's a lot of information on that sheet, right? Like, reading and processing. I don't think we had a huge discussion about a lot of it, just because there was so much information. And just thinking too, I feel like there's that feeling of like discomfort, feeling like we could be doing more, and just kind of sitting with that. And I think there was some discussion of like, I feel like there's like subcategories too, kind of between some of these things. And we were just kind of thinking about that as well. But I think it was just a lot of information to process and kind of eye-opening to think about, you know, where our deficits are and the things that we could be doing differently.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Jen. Anything else, Karen or Shaylin, that you all might want to share?
No.
Great. Yeah. Again, this tool is meant for you all to, you know, kind of take it as a working document, adapt it. We've seen some organizations that have really personalized the tool to address some of their needs. Like, what does it look like on a very organizational, you know, I think it speaks very broadly, but what does it look like? You know, for some of them, it's like twice a year we'll pull up, you know, we'll have a conversation with the family liaison at the school to see if there are any new languages that we haven't, you know, reached out to or that are new in the school. And that's part of their language needs assessment. So that's what they do is they, you know, twice a year they check in with this, you know, family liaison or looking at school data. So you can adapt it to something more personalized to your organization. I want to make sure I leave you all with the actual slide deck of our presentation. I know somebody asked for it and I put it in the chat. And then the other thing that I want to share with you is a feedback form. It's like, it'll take like 3-4 minutes. I'll put that in the chat as well. And just ask that you all complete it. Maria, I'm happy to share the results with you and just sharing some of the thoughts from today. But I want to leave it open to see if anybody has any last reflections or questions before we kind of close up for the day. Or Indira, if you have anything else.
I don't think I have anything else. As I was thinking about this process and organizations that we've worked with in the past, just understanding that this isn't just a switch that we turn on and we say, okay, language just as it is, and you turn on a switch. It doesn't happen that way. It's a journey, right? You got to take the steps. And sometimes we go from awareness to inclusion and then to justice, or we take it a step at a time, right? We take baby steps to get to the goal. So like Rosa said, be gentle on yourselves, but also just think about what can I do differently, or where can I move to the next level. I think that's a good way to look at this tool and the work around language justice. So thank you all for giving us the space to learn together and to share our passion for language justice.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank all three of you and Rosa, Indira, Maria Lisa. And thank you so much for our members for showing up as well too. I know this is a lot of time to take away from your daily life, but I think it's well worth it. And I really hope we can bring some of this to our agencies and we can discuss more. Feel free to email me, or I'm sure they're open to emails as well if you want to discuss this anymore. You want more trainings or trainings at your agencies as well too. So yeah, I wanted to thank you both. If you have any closing statements, let me know, but thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please make sure you all fill out the survey. Our information is here on the screen. If you all want to reach out, you all should all have like the books or case studies, any of the resources we'd love to share with folks. So reach out if you all have any other questions. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Hi, thank you so much.
Bye-bye. All right, Maria, I'm going to go ahead and close it if that's okay with you.
That works. No worries.
Okay. Have a good
Great.
one.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Rosa.
Thanks, Maria Lisa.